Hi everybody, hope your semester has started off wildly, that you're going after it in a big way. I'm Tiff Jensen, your instructor for CCJ 3701 Research Methods in Criminology. We're going to take some time to do a brief introduction to qualitative research. So people usually read faster than I talk, so I'm going to attempt to talk a little faster, give you some elaboration, but I do have a copy of the slides available on Canvas that you can go read through a little bit later if you would like. So by way of outline, we need to look at both quantitative and qualitative research to get a sense of the differences and how they work. So quantitative, as you can imagine, involves quantities, usually statistical methods for interpretation and analysis. This is what we're going to be doing in class. This is what we're using SPSS for. We're going to have large survey data, large archival data that we're going to be analyzing, and it's going to be so fun. I make statistics fun, I promise. Qualitative research will do a little bit of this as well. It gets richer, deeper depictions of people's experiences at more individual levels, ethnography, content analysis, focus groups. We're going to talk about that too. So we have to compare quant versus qual, how they work together, because it shouldn't be us versus you or this one or that one. They actually go hand in hand, especially in criminology. And then we're going to look at some examples of the techniques we use. So first, qualitative research, what is it? I call it the why and how of human behavior. So lots of models and theories involving small groups of participants, interpretation and reflection, speech and text, and the way they're interpreted is very important. We don't want to miss people's accounts of their own actions because it tells us how people perceive them, how they perceive themselves or others. But it's not positivistic, no objective truth. There's different interpretations and no final certainty in knowledge. So we have to be realistic with what we're finding out. Some issues in qualitative, it requires a different way of thinking. So if you like humanities and you really like to do interpretation and you like symbols and meanings, you will love qualitative. That would be just for you. But it struggles with reliability, validity, and generalizability. So reliability has to do with consistency, finding that same or comparable result each time if we were to repeat the study over and over. Because then we'd start to wonder if the study was actually a good study, if it wasn't getting the same result every time. Validity has to do with measuring what we want to measure. Are we hitting the bullseye, or are we off target? If we both want to maybe interview inmates and ask them about food in prison, and you start talking to them about their meal plans, and I start talking to them about, nutritional value, I don't know that we would really get after the same information. So we'd have to make sure that we're measuring the same kind of thing. We might get different answers from those questions. Generalizability, can we actually take the information we get and let it represent the whole population? So often with generalizability, we have historical and cultural limitations, meaning if I were to do an interview of 20 inmates now versus compared to interviews of inmates 20 years ago, it would be pretty different. For example, PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, was just barely enacted 20 years ago. Today, it's standard operating procedure. And so, those are some historical markers that have changed in studies of incarceration. We have cultural limitations. As time goes by, cultures change and how we do things and what things mean. You would definitely have differences by gender, by race, by region, by type of crime that was committed by the inmate. And so we have to kind of think about some of those challenges. When is qualitative useful? Let's say your boss said, hey, I want to know why people in probation are struggling within the first month. It looks like they're all getting PVs or probation violations. And I think they're all the same kinds of issues, but I don't know. Could you go see if you could find out about that? You might be able to do a focus group or interview some probationers and get after maybe some reasons that might be happening. And that would be really helpful to your boss so that you can try to brief new probationers on the pitfalls of being on probation. Because in probation, we want you to succeed and successfully complete it. We don't want you to fail and go back to jail. But qualitative research is great if you can be a little imprecise. It's not as demanding in some ways as quantitative, where you can have a little bit of looseness to it, but there is a lot of structure and precision when it comes to how we interpret, or we at least try to do that. If we're looking at just the everyday experience, we have to be self-aware, How do we impact the people we're studying? Once we get information from them, we think about why, then we go back to the information, then we think about why, and that's normal. You'll kind of reflect back and forth. It's useful to quantitative if the topic's been researched for a long time in the same way and we're looking for a new angle and going after it in a different manner. If it's a new topic to research, so for example, maybe cybercrime and identity theft a little while ago was relatively new, and it was hard to get big sets of data and quantities and surveys out to maybe victims of identity theft or offenders. And so maybe we go interview some victims, or we do a focus group of offenders and get the information that way while we're waiting for more and more information to come out. But that can be helpful in the interim. Or if you want in-depth information that might be difficult to convey quantitatively, so maybe you want to hear more of a person's story rather than just some facts about them or categories that they may identify with. So what are these qualitative methods? Well, the first one is interviews. Personal responses collected through formal questions. They can be less reliable because sometimes people have a funny interaction with others. They don't know if they trust you. How do we build rapport? Help them engage with us. What about my privacy? I maybe feel a little bit of pride about what we're talking about, and I embellish things or elaborate and kind of stretch the truth a little bit. Or maybe I start to feel small or different or less than, and I lose a little dignity because you're asking me about things I'm ashamed of. And there's those effects happen, and so you have to be aware of those. I've interviewed inmates myself, and so I have to think about that as I'm talking to them, because it's going to change the interview and change the response if I'm not keeping track of those things. Body language, facial expressions, tone, those kind of things would matter greatly in an interview. Interviews can be highly structured or semi-structured with questions. So a highly structured would be, you will ask only these questions in this order, in this manner, and that's it. Semi-structured would say, ask these questions, you can deviate a little bit. Maybe you get into a topic that's interesting and you can probe or prompt for more to get more of the story. Or you can change the order of things if the inmate's uncomfortable. You can maybe switch this to the end. And so that's kind of cool to be able to have some flexibility. But again, it's hard to compare interview to interview if they're all a little different. So you have to be careful. Focus groups. You've probably participated in one if you've been a part of a marketing campaign where people in marketing want to know what products you like or what services you do or don't like. Basically, it's a group that you have a facilitator or a researcher, and they're going to prompt you with questions about different kinds of topics. It's less formal. It's more of a conversation you have across the room, but you have to be trained as a facilitator. It's helpful to make sure someone doesn't dominate the conversation because it kind of shuts other people down. It might offer really good information, but because someone's being, kind of a road hog with the conversation, you miss out on that. So we call that groupthink, where people monopolize the conversation. Or maybe they want to be the facilitator themselves, and they want to do this topic, even though it wasn't on your list, and they just keep going that direction, and they kind of do this hostile takeover thing of the whole experience. I've had that happen before. You have some people that just don't care. They're in a room with people, and they're like, I don't want to be here. I remember I was talking to a bunch of state employees in a government office, trying to see if a program was useful to them that we were running for foster kids, and two guys in the corner were sleeping. They didn't care. They didn't want to be there. Not getting a lot of information out of those two. So you have to keep track of some of that stuff if you do a focus group. I wouldn't do a focus group with more than 30 or 40 people in the room. That would be really a challenge to keep everybody going. Case studies. Case studies, you know what these are. They're kind of stories or cases that you can collect from a lot of different sources. It gives you some history to work with. You just basically look it over and investigate what happened in that circumstance. Depending on how many case studies you have, it could be more quantitative. If you do more than 30, that's getting up there into the quantities and the numbers that you would need to be able to do some more analyses. You also use case studies for what we call meta-analysis, which is a study of studies. So if you want someone to take 50 studies or 100 studies on a topic and boil it down to what everyone actually knows collectively, that's what a meta-analysis is. So if you find one, consider yourself lucky, because it just helps you get through 100 different articles in one article. They do this in political science quite a bit. Ethnography, we're kind of rounding out our last two parts of this presentation. Ethnography is basically, I call it going native. You're living with people in their experience. There's a great book by Ted Conover. It's called New Jack. And he goes to Sing Sing prison in New York City, and he becomes a guard and basically lives with the inmates as a guard and writes his whole experience down. That's ethnography. They do it in anthropology all the time, where you live amongst the people that you're studying. You're trying to capture their experience. So it's kind of you can do it incognito. Journalists do it a little bit sometimes. But sometimes people know that you're there. Other times they assume who you are. And so you can kind of be voluntary about your purpose. Other times you keep it more covert. But it's fun to do. Now you can imagine criminology, it could be challenging ethically. If you're going to live amongst homeless people or drug addicts or amongst offenders, that could be very compromising in your job. Living amongst victims could equally be a challenge. So ethnography is one you're not going to do maybe as much, but it's something that you can use in your work. It can get a very deep depiction of people's lives and how they live. I love the part here that says social constructionism, or social constructivism, I should say. You're going to see that often in the media and crime class. How do people make sense of their world? How do they accomplish things? And how does this all come together to create meaning? That is what ethnography is about. So ethno meaning people, graph meaning to draw. So we're literally drawing out a social landscape of people's lives. That's what ethnography is. Okay? Last but not least, content analysis. So this is where you can look at any kind of content you want. It's not people, it's the stuff they make. So it can be journals, news articles, photographs, Facebook pages, printed or online media, transcripts, speeches, commercials, graffiti, books, art. It can be anything. But basically you get a lot of it together and you let it illustrate the human experience. And so you're tracking certain topics, trying to keep a tally of if they're coming up often. So maybe you wanted to see how many people have been writing articles about sex trafficking. You want to see if it's getting enough attention. So maybe you go in the big journals like Criminology or Crime and Public Policy and you start going, how many articles are coming out on sex trafficking? And you start counting. That would be content analysis. If you get maybe high counts, it might show, hey, this is kind of the flavor of the day. A lot of people are studying this. Communication journalism use this all the time because they want to look at what topics are salient or meaningful to people in that moment. We use it in sociology and criminology as well. So it helps us track trends in the field where certain things are hot or maybe going out of favor, and we want to see if we're right. Content analysis can easily go into quantitative, depending on how many of these artifacts you're looking at. If you get into large quantities and you're making a little catalog or a spreadsheet of them, you're doing quantitative. But some people look at just a few because it's such a tasking kind of thing to do where, you're studying them deeply. So it can be very time consuming. But in a sense, you just did an intro to qualitative methods in 14 minutes. So it gives you a sense of what it is. There's a reason, again, I'll just reiterate that I don't have a textbook. Most of this material is so widely used in social science. You'll find it everywhere, not only in social science, but other sciences. To me, it's something you'll come across again and again. So you might as well enjoy a lot of the free material out there on it, and be able to get lots of perspectives from people presenting on that material. So if you have any questions about qualitative methods or want to hear stories from the field when I've done ethnography or focus groups or interviews, please let me know. Happy to help you, and enjoy the next lecture. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.